This was the city 30 years ago. A city then one of the greatest in the world, in size and stature, ranking with London, Paris, Rome, New York. Alive and a unity, this was Berlin in the 1930s. No barriers at the Brandenburger Tor, no guards at the Potsdamer Platz. But this was Berlin before Hitler came to power. In 1945, and this was Berlin, a city in name only, a geographical location. Amid the rubble of destruction, the flags of the victors, men who'd taken up arms in self-defense with a common aim to destroy that which menaced them all. Around them, a defeated nation, for their armies had met in the very middle of Germany. Until such time as Germany could reshape her own destiny, she would be divided into separate zones of occupation, each controlled by an allied power, American, British, French, Russian. Economically, she would be treated as a whole. This the victors had agreed when they had met to decide the future of Germany. Even then, some had reservations about mutual trust. But a world war just over, they had to trust one another, or else begin another war. For Berlin, it was to be each power with its sector, but a city open to all the powers until Berlin could again assume her role as the capital of a new German state. Berlin lay 100 miles deep in the Soviet occupation zone, but was not part of it. Access to the city for the other powers was agreed over certain roads, railways, and 3 air corridors. Makeshift, perhaps, but then it was never meant to be permanent. In Berlin, they set up the headquarters of an Allied Kommandatura, where, day by day, officers of the 4 occupying powers would administer Berlin by cooperation, by joint agreement as to what was to be done and how. And frankly, what was to be done meant starting again from scratch. Yet amid the ruins and the deprivation, slowly a start was made. A start not only upon the physical reconstruction, but also the political rebirth of the city. It would appear that the Soviets had agreed to joint occupation only because they believed that in the first free elections, Berlin would vote communist. So it was with confidence that they watched the democratic processes of free ballot. But although communist support in Berlin was far from negligible, for them the results came as a shock. Instead of a landslide for the extreme left, there came instead a victory for the Social Democrats and other non-communists. But when in June 1947, the town assembly elected Ernst Reuter for mayor, this proved to be a victory without fruit. For in the Allied Kommandatura, the frustrated Soviets vetoed his election. It was a step, ominous and foreboding. Until that moment, the city had been divided in name only. But from then on, the Russians made the divisions more clear-cut. They set up a communist system in their own sector and established decided barriers between it and those of their recent allies. These were the years in which the expression Iron Curtain became a reality. Along a line from the Baltic to the Balkans, a clampdown. In place of the comradeship of victory, barbed wire, suspicion, and distrust. Years of disillusionment. Meanwhile, over the frontier paths, there flowed a steady stream of refugees east to west. Soon it became clear that most were moving westwards because they could not tolerate life in the east. Again, an ominous sign. In the eastern sector of Berlin, communist power was fully established. Party bosses, party youth, party rallies, permeated with all the hysteria previously associated with the Nazis. By organizing special police and paramilitary units, the Soviets were illegally rearming East Germany. In the World Councils of the United Nations, the war-weary were endeavoring to establish a lasting peace. But these were the days of Stalinist expansion, and so, by repeated refusals to cooperate, except on their own terms, the Soviet delegates sabotaged any progress towards real stability. On the 23rd of June 1948, West Berlin introduced monetary reform, without which economic recovery would have been impossible. New notes for old. The currency was revalued. For the Russians, their disagreement gave them the excuse for action. West Berlin they could not touch, but they could and did interfere with the lifelines on which West Berlin depended. The roads, the railways, the canals. These were West Berlin's vital arteries. So stop the trains. Close the roads. Bar the canals and cut the power. West Berlin was 100 miles deep in the Soviet zone of Germany. This was to be the way to force the Western Allies to quit Berlin. Thus, 2 million people were isolated, to be faced with the prospect of hunger, cold, unemployment, and misery. No way in, no way out. The only element still open, the air above. It started as a trickle, as a temporary measure. Plane after plane. Destination, the airfields of West Berlin. The vital necessities, food, raw materials, even coal brought in by air, until the United States, Great Britain and France were embarked upon the biggest air transport operation history has ever seen. Round the clock, plane after plane. Even flying boats to set down on West Berlin's lakes. In the beleaguered city, power shortage enforced skeleton transport services. Food shortage necessitated careful distribution and queues. But rather short measure than surrender. As each night fell, the roar of aero engines continued. Dependent for the most part on power from the eastern sector, West Berlin was plunged each night into a blackout. But while West Berliners felt their way through the gloom, still their airlift continued through the hours of darkness.